And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Megan Hemy, who's going to be speaking about characteristics and outcomes of dogs admitted into RSPCA Queensland shelters. Megan graduated from the University of Queensland at the end of 2015, where she was awarded the UQ Shelter Medicine Prize for her final year research project. In 2016, she worked within a mixed practice in Launceston for 12 months, where she provided veterinary care for private clients, rescue organisations, and wildlife carers. Megan is currently undertaking a 12-month emergency and critical care internship in Melbourne's Animal Accident and Emergency. Her interests include emergency medicine and behaviour. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. This morning I will be providing you with a super quick rundown of my recently published study. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Emeritus Professor Jackie Rand, Dr. John Morton and Dr. Mandy Patterson. Currently, other than our very general statistics, such as the RSPCA's annual statistics, there is currently very little up-to-date information, Australian information, on the characteristics of the dogs actually entering shelters. The most recent study of this type was actually conducted more than 10 years ago. On the other hand, we've actually found there's been quite a considerable amount of research into cat admissions into RSPCA shelters in the last few years. By understanding exactly what is contributing to intakes of animals dogs into shelters, we may be able to create targeted population management strategies to effectively reduce the number of dogs admitted into shelters in a cost-effective manner. Therefore, the aim of our study was to describe the characteristics and outcomes of dogs entering RSPCA shelters in 2014. 11,967 initial dog entries were used for the final analysis, which was primarily descriptive statistics. For the purposes of our study, we defined puppies as equal to or less than 6 months of age and adult dogs as greater than 6 months old. We found that the majority of adult admissions came from councils, and communication with the RSPCA led us to believe that the majority of these were in fact strays. Therefore, up to 63% of adult admissions were stray dogs, and just 15% were owner surrenders. Up to 45% of puppy admissions were strays, and a considerably greater proportion of puppy admissions were owner surrenders. In fact, it was more than double that of adult admissions at 32%. On further investigation into the reasons for surrender, we found that the majority of surrenders were due to human-related reasons, and just 14% were due to dog-related reasons. Amongst adults surrendered for, amongst the human-related reasons, the greatest majority of adult surrenders were due to a change in circumstances. This category included instances where the owners were moving or travelling. 20% of adult surrenders were because the dog was unwanted. This category included dogs where a poor decision had been made, or there were just too many dogs within the household. Interestingly, 7% of adult surrenders were due to accommodation problems, including landlord restrictions. Almost 70% of surrendered puppies were unwanted, and the greatest reason for this was because there were too many dogs within the household. 20% of puppy surrenders were due to financial restraints. When looking into the dog-related reasons for surrender, 22% of adult surrenders were due to behavioural reasons, compared to just 1% of puppy surrenders. The primary behavioural reason for surrender was some form of aggressive behaviour. We found that more than a quarter of admissions were puppies, which is quite considerable for a 6-month age bracket. 60% of admissions were dogs greater than 12 months of age, and the largest admission group were mature adults between 2 and 7 years old. at 33%. On further, we found that more males were admitted than females, and this disparity between male and female admissions appeared to increase from almost equal proportions of puppies admitted to a 13% difference amongst mature adults. We found that overall 54% of admissions were males. However, in order to determine if these ages and this sex distribution is overrepresented within the shelters, we would need a better understanding of the age and sex distribution within the owned population. A national study into pet ownership found that of 78% of owned Australian dogs were desexed. This is considerably more than what we found in our study, with 14% of all dogs admitted into shelters and 18% of adults were desexed. This low desexing rate combined with an apparent high number of puppies entering shelters leads us to some suspicion that unplanned litters are still contributing substantially to the puppy population within shelters. We found that 92% of all dogs entering shelters were crossbreeds, and 98% of puppies were actually crossbreed dogs. Again, the 2013 pet ownership study found that 50% of owned dogs were crossbreeds. Again, you would assume that most planned pregnancies are to produce purebred dogs. Therefore, with such a sizable proportion of crossbred puppies entering shelters, again, we're a little bit suspicious that unplanned pregnancies are leading to these puppies entering shelters. On looking into what in 2013, the top breeds registered with the Australian National Kennel Council were Labrador Retrievers, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, German Shepherds, Golden Retrievers, and Border Collies. Of these, four of these, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Labrador Retrievers, German Shepherds, and Border Collies, are amongst the top 5 breeds of crossbred and purebred dogs coming into shelters. The most prevalent breed within shelters was Staffordshire Bull Terriers, which made up 20% of the primary breed of both pure and crossbred dogs. Interestingly, 3 of these breeds, Border Collies, Australian Cattle Dogs, and Kelpies, are classed as working breeds by the Australian National Kennel Council. These breeds are known for their intelligence and high energy levels. The rest of these breeds on this chart here are also reasonably high energy breeds, and it may be that this predisposes them to destructive behaviours, boredom, and escaping, possibly leading to their prevalence within this study. However, we would need a better understanding of the breed distribution of the owned population in order to determine whether these breeds are overrepresented. After previous studies have shown clear seasonal patterns into kitten admissions, we were curious to see if the same occurred within puppy admissions. Whilst we did only examine 1 year of data, we did have some interesting findings. We found that significantly more puppies were admitted in January and September, and significantly more adults were admitted in January. Possible explanations for these findings include seasonal patterns in seasonal breeding patterns, changes in human behaviour, such as the January school holidays, and the prevalence of fireworks and storms within Queensland in January. When we looked into where these dogs were coming from, we looked into both the total number of admissions as well as the number of admissions per 1,000 residents. The top 5 postcodes, which had the greatest number of admissions per 1,000 residents, were Kingaroy, Caboolture, Gympie, Morayfield, and Burdell. Their intakes range from 15 to 21 dogs per 1,000 residents. This is more than double the national average of 9.3 dogs per 1,000 residents. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has formulated a ranking system of socioeconomic advantage and disadvantage called the Socioeconomic Index for Areas, or CIFA rank. A higher number or rank means that an area is more advantaged and less disadvantaged than a lower rank. Interestingly, we found that amongst 4 out of 5 of these postcodes had CIFA ranks below the median, and 3 of them, the median of 242, and 3 of them had ranks close to or below the lower quartile of 126. Looking into the total number of admissions, Toowoomba, Caboolture, Gympie, Townsville and Dakaban were the top 5 intakes. Again, 4 out of 5 of these had intakes per 1,000 residents greater than the national average, and 3 of these had CIFA rankings below the median. These supporting findings were indicating that Notably, we found that there were 17 postcodes with CIFA ranks greater than 400. Of these, all bar 2 actually had intakes of less than 1 dog per 1,000 residents, and the other 2 had intakes of 1.4 and 2.1 dogs per 1,000 residents. This supports previous studies where socioeconomic position plays a role in pet relinquishment and straying. The vast majority of dogs were adopted at 43% or reclaimed at 32%. Just 14% of dogs were euthanized. Amongst the dogs, 40% of adults were reclaimed, compared to just 10% of puppies. This again supports our suspicion that more of these puppies are being admitted because they are the result of an unwanted litter. Of the total unclaimed dogs, which made up 68% of admissions, the majority of them were adopted at 63%. Almost 80% of puppies were adopted, compared to just 55% of adults. This may reflect a tendency amongst adopters to adopt puppies as opposed to adults, and perhaps more encouragement is required for adult admissions. We found that 27% of unclaimed adults were adopted, and just 5% of unclaimed puppies were adopted. Of the dogs which were euthanized, the majority were euthanized for behavioural reasons at 53%. And 85% of these were euthanized for aggressive behaviour. 23% of euthanasias were due to health-related reasons, and 20% were owner-requested. In conclusion, we found that puppies led to more than a quarter of admissions, and most of these were owner surrenders. The primary reason for surrendered puppies was that they were unwanted, and most of these were due to too many animals. We also found that some postcodes were greater contributors to overall intake, and these postcodes tended to be were more socioeconomically disadvantaged. We also found that the desexing rate of dogs entering the shelters was considerably lower than that within the general population. These findings lead us to some key recommendations where by targeting low-cost desexing programs to intakes to areas which are overrepresented by high intakes and high intakes per capita is likely to have a greater effect than more generalised campaigns. Previous US studies have found that by targeting the low-cost desexing campaigns such as discounts and transportation to underserviced areas, so areas that tend to be low socioeconomic regions, they were actually able to increase the desexing rate up to national levels. A further key finding was that strays contributed to up to 63% of adult admissions. A 2015 study into RSPCA Queensland admissions found that only 28% of dogs admitted into shelters were microchipped, and of these, 37% had errors with their microchipping data or were simply not registered with a database. Therefore, a key recommendation would be to look into improving these microchipping rates. Further to this, we could also look into the cost effectiveness of providing visual ID tags with these microchips, which would allow the general public to return these strays without relying on the resources of councils or shelters. Again, focusing on the areas with high intake and high intake per capita is likely to have a greater effect. Regarding our finding, where a large proportion of adult surrenders were due to a change in circumstances, such as moving or travelling, or even accommodation problems. One topic which is currently at the forefront of discussion at the moment are the laws surrounding pets in rental properties and the restrictions. Based on this data, by reducing these restrictions and changing them, we may be able to have a significant reduction in the number of dogs entering shelters, especially if the owners have issues with their accommodation. Finally, regarding our finding where behaviour led to 22% of adult surrenders and 53% of euthanasias, a key recommendation would be to increase the number of the availability of behavioural services at discount rates, as well as increasing awareness within the general public of the current behavioural services available. Although very anecdotal, within private practice, I've noted that many owners that could potentially benefit from these services that are available are just simply not aware of their existence. These recommendations could lead to a reduction in dogs surrendered or euthanized for behavioural reasons. On a final note, I'd like to sincerely thank the RSPCA and Dr Corinne Albertson for their valuable contribution to this study.